Welcome, everybody. This is Lucian Fogoros, your host for today, and I'd like to turn it over to the MC for the last session of today. Ask Me Anything with Mr. Lucian Niemeyer, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense. Juan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've already heard plenty from Lucian Niemeyer, former Deputy Program Associate Director of National Security Programs at the Office of Management and Budget and Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Defense. And we have a Ask Me Anything session with him kicking off now. My name is Juan Muldoon, and I'm a partner at Energize Ventures, a fund investing in startups bringing digital technology to modernize our energy and industry. We live and breathe at the intersection of the digital and the physical world. Industries like energy and power and manufacturing are modernizing their asset base and finding software to improve their operations. And a big part of the thesis there is that anything that can be optimized through software can also be weaponized through software. And so it's important to have the right tools to improve the resiliency of our critical infrastructure as a whole. From ransomware attacks to pipeline shutdowns, this is unfortunately constant reminders of the weakness of our cybersecurity posture as a country. And so maybe, Lucian, let's start there. Why has it been so difficult for the physical world around us to understand and prioritize cybersecurity?
Right now, because it's not considered to be a value prop. I think what we're looking at is smart technologies. We want them because they actually can provide us a return. Either through increased efficiency, reduced overhead. So we definitely like where we want to go with a smart world. But right now, as it stands, there's not really a return on investment for risk mitigation. So we want to embrace all these smart things because they are new and fancy, and they're going to make our life better. But until you really try to put a value prop or a value on enhancing the cybersecurity, it's not going to flow as fast as it should. And that's really what we're trying to do, is how do you assign that value as opposed to it just being something you have to do to mitigate risk.
I think there's two parts to this that you guys are working on. One is that value creation, right? Assigning a value, like you just said. But I think the other is pushing awareness that this is actually a problem. I'm curious, in your work across the DoD and the White House, what are some important elements to drive awareness and change at a major scale when sometimes these industries are very disorganized? There's a lack of standards and protocols to meet.
Yeah, I think it's also it starts with understanding what technology can do. And look, I started a lot when I was an Assistant Secretary of Defense. I mean, I started talking about cybersecurity for operational technologies by giving some examples of what can happen. Thermostats, smart thermostats that can be turned into listening devices. How you can pretty much take any smart technology in a home and through an iPhone exploitation, start raising garage doors or opening doors or releasing cipher locks or even seizing elevators. I mean, when you start seeing the practical examples of what can happen, that's when people really start thinking, hey, wait a minute. This is not happening to somebody else. It could actually happen to me. I mean, currently, I'm sitting up here with a bunch of real estate owners. They don't understand that there are things that can happen to their building that ultimately they're not even aware of and didn't realize there was a risk. So it does start with just education of what these devices are meant for, but what can they do? Remember, a lot of them have the same chips we use in our cars, and those chips, and I know there are manufacturers who are working on securing those chips, but right now, some of those chips can be remanipulated, reprogrammed to do other things than what they were intended. It's just a matter of people realizing that exists, and then ultimately, how do we go ahead and protect against it?
So to make that threat even more tangible, you see there's a lack of expertise, cyber expertise in the built world in general, and a proliferation of devices that may or may not be secure and that people may not think about as potential threat vectors or backdoors to malicious actors. How do you think about who's bearing that risk, right? It's a pretty complicated value chain, from the OEM of that device to the supply chain that they're relying on, to the person that's buying it, to maybe the person that's supplying that to the end customer, the insurance company that may be underwriting that building that's also absorbing some of that risk. Tell us a little bit about how you think about that entire
Oh my
chain.
gosh, Juan, how much time do we have? I mean, look, that's really, Target was attacked 7 years ago by a malware injected by a third-party vendor managing their HVAC system, who's at fault? They're still in court trying to figure that out. I mean, there's been lawyers who have made millions of dollars on trying to figure out who's at fault. So there really is an uncertainty in the risk. And I think that's why insurance companies really want to have a national framework to start quantifying and qualifying and bounding that risk. So you would say that insurance companies carries a lot of risk, but right now the policies they're writing, first of all, have active war inclusions that are size of Delaware. And so you can get out of those policies. And there really is there's a wild west when it comes to who actually assumes risk of public infrastructure projects, whether it's going to be the private sector partner or the public sector. I mean, that's the reason why we're working with all these organizations, is to suggest, okay, here's how you write documents to bound that risk. It's just not out there. I mean, how many contracts for a lease for a building include a cybersecurity clause? Doesn't exist. So the goal is, as we're raising awareness on this, and ultimately who bears the risk, whether it be the manufacturer of a device that gets exploited, whether it be the chip manufacturer, whether it be the designer, there really isn't any case law on that. And more importantly, there really isn't any assumption of risk. So everyone's kind of pointing at each other. And that is really what we're trying to do, is create a framework that will start to incentivize those to assume the risk and then mitigate the risk.
So tell us a little bit about that framework, because I think the operating question here is, everybody looking around the room, am I doing enough? Right? Am I going to get the finger pointed at me? Am I going to have to go in front of Congress and defend, why I didn't maybe allocate more budget to this, especially if you're thinking about critical infrastructure type of companies like utilities and gas operators, et cetera. How do we think as an industry about where that baseline is to be quote unquote doing enough, and where is that sort of badge of approval, right, where we can say, okay, you've done at least best efforts basis, or to the extent that we're able to mitigate some of these risks?
Yeah, Juan, you're hitting the best questions. I mean, this is exactly where we're at right now. If you look at a typical IT budget for a company, the rule of thumb, and again, it's just based on best practices, is 10% of your total IT budget should go to some type of cybersecurity, cyber protection. And that's what Colonial will argue in court. Right now, there's a series of class action lawsuits against Colonial Pipeline, for which some of the vendors who relied on that gas are saying that Colonial Pipeline did not do enough to protect its critical systems from a cybersecurity attack. That is going to be trend setting. What is enough? The CEO for Colonial said, "Hey, we spent a commensurate amount of our budget to what others are doing in industry." He said that he threw out a number, 20 million. Okay, obviously that wasn't enough to stop an attack. So what is enough? I think you're going to see that needle move, not necessarily where it's going to overwhelm an IT budget, but ultimately it needs to start being quantified on what it's being spent on, not necessarily just a dollar amount, but ultimately what controls you want to put in place, what investments do you want to make, how do you want to make those investments? That's really what's lacking. So Colonial can say they spent a really good amount on cybersecurity. They hired one of the best firms in the country to manage their security, and yet they still had a breach. The goal is, okay, what did that firm do? How did it do it? And those are the things that don't necessarily, those standards don't exist collectively and holistically across as a national framework. And that's exactly why BCS is a nonprofit, at least on the operational technology side, is trying to build that benchmark. This is what a cyber bronze level looks like. This is what a cyber silver level looks like, and create those common controls that everybody can rally around. And then with our partners on the IT side, we're partnered up with Center for Internet Security on building that flank as well, knowing that smart technologies are a blending of IT and OT. What do they have as far as a framework that can be a national benchmark? So that's really what we're trying to do, is create that baseline benchmark for then people then can see, okay, where are we compared to what the industry says?
That's great. But before I go on to my next question, just to remind the audience, please chime in with questions. Several of you have already done so. There is a chat function here directly on Zoom, and please be sure to post your questions. I'll be getting to them as best as I can. This question actually comes from Alex, and I think it follows what you've just said. How soon do you think before companies will actually be displaying some sort of badge of industrial cybersecurity certified?
Okay, so there's two answers to that. First of all, do you want to? Right now within our organization, do you want to publicly display that you are cyber bronze or cyber silver. There's a concern here that that might end up being a kind of a target at that point, where particularly a hacker with a chip on their shoulder say, well, okay, that's cyber platinum. Let me go show this group how bad they are. So we are internally discussing, okay, it's one thing to tell an insurance company what your level is. Do you want to tell the general public? That's the first step. Now, how soon can we do it? Hopefully as quickly as possible. We started this journey. The nonprofit started in January of 20, right as the pandemic was hitting. We did run in some roadblocks as far as the caused by the pandemic, but I would say in the last 4 or 5 months, we've been full speed ahead. Similar standards like for sustainability, it took 10 years to develop. We're trying to get it done in 6 months. So we do believe we're on a fast course. How soon can we start deploying it? It depends on a couple of big tests we have, what we call beta tests. As you know, you never want to roll out any new product without doing beta testing. And we're going through that right now with the insurance companies, as well as selected properties who are volunteering to be the guinea pig for the application of our framework. We're going to need to get through that. We need to make sure that we are credible when we go public, we are affordable, and we are also effective. And that may take us at least a couple more months to get to that point.
That's great. Thank you. The next question.
Great question, by the way. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Also coming in from the Q&A function here, and it's the role of regulation. How much of a need is there for regulations to state who will finally be responsible to answer that question, or will the market and eventually lawyers take over?
Yeah, look, that is, I come from the federal government. I spend most of my time serving my country, either in the military or the federal level. I am concerned that regulations, if there are mandates for cybersecurity compliance levels, similar to what's going on right now in some states, California's got a basic standard. Unfortunately, they're going to be so basic as not to be effective. If you see what's going on in the utility industry, they have what they call critical infrastructure protection standards, but they're not keeping up with the fast evolving cyber threat. And so they're kind of a year or two behind, and it's difficult to update regulations. So we feel, and again, I'm a product of the federal government, I feel like the private sector could be a more effective way to implement a framework, keep it updated based on the threat, be much more nimble on how you add additional controls. And then the regulation I would want to see from federal government or state and local, okay, that water system needs to be cyber bronze. Now that cyber bronze level is going to be adjusted, so government's going to be responsible for that. But I think it's going to be a much more effective model than the federal government or state governments trying to consistently update their regulations to match a vastly and quickly evolving cyber threat. And I just think that's really the extent of regulation, is requiring some type of third-party labeling authority. That's similar to what the National Solarium Commission put out as a recommendation specifically to address cyber protections, some type of third-party nonprofit that ultimately can move much faster than the federal government on keeping up to speed.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one thing we've seen from the trenches working specifically in the power and the energy sector, regulation is usually behind. And so oftentimes these CISOs or these IT departments will keep up with the regulation, but they know they're still unprotected. And it's almost a negative effect, because then they just assume that they might be breached, and they dedicate more resources to detection and response from a pragmatic standpoint, rather than trying to shore up the defenses. Which is, obviously difficult to stay on top and one step ahead all the time.
Yeah. Hey, my credits to the FERC and NERC. Those are the two agencies that kind of regulate the utility industry.
Right.
They actually decided, yep, okay, you're right. SIP is moving too slow. So let us reward those utilities who are coming up with innovative cybersecurity solutions. Let us go ahead and credit those, as opposed to continuing to enforce SIP standards. I don't know if you remember, even a couple of years ago, one utility was willing to take the fine for not adhering to SIP standards because they just realized that it was costing them money and they were completely not effective. So I think you are seeing a translation where we need to be much faster at the regulatory level on how quickly we can update and keep up with the threat.
That's great. This question comes from Paul, and it's also related to this. It's a rather long question, so let me read it. According to the draft SP 800-213 on IoT cybersecurity for the federal government, federal agency CIOs have been tasked with authorizing waivers to existing RMF controls for integration of new IoT and IIoT technology. There are no DoD-specific test beds currently. what resources would you like to see available to the DoD CIO to support this recurring decision process?
Okay, that was written by a ringer. I think I know who. They know exactly what I was working on at DoD. There are some programs out there, mosaics. I mean, there's a conference coming up on an application that might serve as a test bed. He's right. That there is a overall lack of test beds of innovative technologies that we could use to enhance our cybersecurity. I see more lab work in this area, particularly among the military services. But he's at the writer's absolutely correct. There's not as much as there needs to be. And look, that's exactly what I saw when I was in DoD. That we weren't really doing enough. That's just within DoD. But more importantly, we're not doing near enough for society. So yes, I would love to see more RDT&E money put into more test beds to see what works and what doesn't among the controls. I would love to take the control system that we've come up with within BCS and suggest it. He mentioned RMF, that's a risk management framework. Yes, I would like to see what DoD thinks about our controls and in a test bed environment. That's one of the things we're going to work on. But he's absolutely correct. There's a lack of resources right now in DoD to address it.
That's great. Thank you. And then shifting a little bit here on the different stakeholders. So we've talked a little bit about federal government. We've talked about different regulation. Let's go to the private markets here. How do we? The question says, you talked about cybersecurity being ready to jump on insurance companies on certifications, et cetera. What about credit companies like Moody's, Equifax, DNB, folks that also in some way, shape, or form reflect a risk profile for an individual company or investment?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. We're starting with underwriters only because that can be the direct benefit coming back to the CEO. When an underwriter says, okay, you've achieved a cybersecurity level, therefore you have your assets protected, we're going to give you a reduction. It's not that far off from a car insurance company saying, hey, if you're a good driver, we're going to give you a discount. But you're absolutely correct. The credit markets, the bond markets, anybody that's investing in risk, because as you know, that's kind of what we do as a society. We spend a lot of time speculating on future business revenue, future business risk. And yes, we are getting a lot of positive response from the Moody's of the world who would like to see what we have and how they can apply it to some of the assets and instruments they use. And really, it could be eventually be useful to just about anybody that's assessing cyber risk in any type of medium. And that is our hope within the next 6 months to 12 months, that we move beyond underwriters and insurance brokers more into the risk managers of big time risk.
So not to lead the witness too much, but what I'm hearing is that the federal government is a part of the solution here, but maybe slow and somewhat inefficient at times. No offense.
Yeah. Let me comment on that real quick. Yeah, I don't want to downplay the federal government. The folks at CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, look, they're trying. They've just got a new infusion of cash. I think the president has made it clear, and I agree that this has to be a public-private solution. The government can't do it alone. As you know, he had a summit a few weeks ago, brought in Microsoft, brought in Google, brought in the super techs, and there is a collective desire to address a range of cybersecurity issues, not just in actual controls to improve it. But look, we have huge workforce issues in this country. Microsoft pledged $20 billion towards workforce training. I mean, we have a 500,000 person shortage in cyber professionals that are needed desperately right now to apply their expertise across the board. So yeah, the government is doing a lot, but I think they realize that it has to be a private sector partnership. I mean, I was thrilled when President Biden said, hey, we need voluntary performance controls for facilities. We're like, hello, that's exactly what we've developed. I mean, that's what we've been working on for the entire year. And we're in right now with the National Security Council briefing that and saying, hey, look, this is ready to go. So I think that collaboration is going to work where we do have a private sector role for what we're trying to do, society-wide, not just essential services, not just critical infrastructure, but across all society. I'm sorry, Juan, you put me on my pedestal there for a minute.
Oh, this is great. You did a great job. This is why you were on that pedestal.
Yeah.
We might have time for one more question, and so please get them in. Okay, here's a question being asked. What are your thoughts when dealing with engineers and management and development that are mostly focused on getting to market fast and maybe deprioritizing product security and figuring out the market risks later, more of a ask for forgiveness model.
Yeah.
How do you think about the industry shifting left?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And the manufacturers of the world, I mean, there's only a relatively small number of control system manufacturers. They do want to maintain competitiveness, against others. And how do we incentivize? Part of what the framework is going to do is incentivize technology improvements. What do you do with encryption? What do you do with a next level of authentication? What do you do with other things? Other ways you can monitor your device. I mean, there should be in every smart thermostat we put in the future. Where is there a red light that goes off that says, hey, there's a data anomaly in this control that somebody needs to check out. So yes, I do believe there's a role for engineers. We have to engineer cyber protection in. We can't bolt it on after the fact. And this is coming from a former engineer. You really, for it to be work well, it has to be integrated into a device and then integrated into installation. So yes, we do expect and hope that somewhere soon, a control system from manufacturer X will be rated as cyber platinum or cyber gold or cyber silver based on the technology they put in that device specifically to address cybersecurity and cyber safety, more cyber safety.
That's great. That's a great jumping off point. Thank you everybody for joining the session. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Lucian for your service and for your continued work.
I appreciate it, Juan. And I just got the survey myself, so I'm going to put down outstanding for the work you did in monitoring this. But yes, I very much appreciate the opportunity. And Lucian, of course, it is it's a honor to support the work you're doing and spreading the awareness on cybersecurity. So thank you very much.
Likewise, takes all of us.
Thank you all for joining. And this concludes the program for today. It's been an outstanding day with several sessions. So look forward to continue this work. There's a lot of work done around the awareness this month. So stay tuned on some of the channels on IoT World and building cybersecurity, as well as Juan's venture capitalist. So thanks, and appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.